They didn't say it outright. That would have been rude. Instead, they exchanged looks, the kind that passes judgment without words. We were sitting around the long conference table. Family meeting, informal but tense. Coffee untouched. Phones face down. Everyone waiting for me to finish explaining. So, my brother said slowly, leaning back in his chair, "You're cutting back?" "I'm restructuring," I replied. My sister tilted her head. "By doing less. By doing differently." That's when the silence changed. From listening to doubting. And someone finally said what everyone else was thinking. "I just don't see how this works." I smiled politely. Because what I didn't say, what none of them knew, was this. They didn't know what I had already done. They called it a plan the way people say phase. Temporary. Optimistic. Naive. I called it containment. I had reduced expenses deliberately. Paused upgrades everyone else rushed into. Redirected cash where it would quietly compound. No drama. No announcements. Just math. But to them, it looked like retreat. "You're being too cautious," my cousin said. "At some point you have to scale," another added. "This feels like fear dressed up as strategy." I nodded thoughtfully. Because fear is what people accuse you of when they don't understand patience. They love consultants. Outside voices. Slide decks. Hourly rates that felt like validation. One of them mentioned their consultant by name, like a credential. "He helped us streamline everything," my brother said. "Worth every penny." I smiled. "Sounds expensive," I replied. He laughed. "You have to spend money to make money." I didn't argue, because arguing would have revealed too much too soon. What they didn't see was the spreadsheet I checked every morning. Not obsessively. Intentionally. Savings moving upward. Not dramatically, but steadily. Buffers forming. Risk evaporating. It wasn't exciting, which is exactly why it worked. They asked when I go back to normal. I asked what normal had cost them. That didn't go over well. After the meeting, my sister pulled me aside. "I'm worried about you," she said softly. "You're pulling back when everyone else is pushing forward." I met her eyes. "I'm pulling back so I can move without pressure," I replied. She smiled sympathetically. "That's not how growth works," she said. I let her believe that. The truth was, I'd already doubled my savings. Quietly, without anyone noticing. Not by luck, not by a windfall, by refusing to impress people who weren't paying my bills. What they call playing small, I call buying time. Time to observe. Time to let their urgency reveal cracks. Time to decide who I wanted advising me, and who I didn't. The consultant they praised so highly? I'd already read his articles, followed his frameworks, noticed where he was careful and where he was vague. Experts are easier to assess when you're not desperate for them. At the next gathering, the joke started. Still sticking to the plan? Living lean, waiting for the big break. I smiled each time, because smiles cost nothing and buy you space. That night, alone at my desk, I reviewed my numbers again. The savings had crossed a line. Not rich, not free, but protected. And protection changes how you move. I drafted an email. Short, direct, to the very consultant they kept recommending. Not asking for validation. Not pitching an idea. Just one sentence. "I'd like to discuss an engagement." I didn't send it right away, because timing matters. And soon, very soon, they were going to realize something uncomfortable. That while they were debating my plan, it had already put me in a position they hadn't reached yet. I didn't tell anyone I'd reached out to him. Not my brother. Not my sister. Not the cousin who dropped his name like a resume bullet point. Because the moment you announce intent, people start pricing your confidence instead of your results. And I wasn't shopping for opinions. The consultant replied the next morning. Professional. Neutral. Interested. He didn't ask or referred me. That alone told me something important. People who rely on reputation usually ask. People who rely on outcomes don't need to. We scheduled a call for the following week. I spent the days before it doing nothing that looked impressive. No pitch deck. No grand vision statement. Just numbers. Cash flow. Savings rate. Constraints I'd imposed deliberately. I wanted to see how he reacted to discipline, not ambition. The call started exactly on time. "That's already a good sign," he said. I smiled. "You'd be surprised how rare it is," I replied. He chuckled. "So tell me," he continued, What problem are you trying to solve? I didn't hesitate. I'm trying to remove urgency, I said. There was a pause. Then, interesting. Most people call me because they want to accelerate. I know, I replied. That's why I waited. I walked him through my plan. Not theatrically, quietly. How I'd reduced burn. How I doubled savings without increasing income. How I created optionality before leverage. He didn't interrupt. That mattered. When I finished, he leaned back. You know, he said, most clients don't come to me with this level of clarity. I nodded. That's because most people hire consultants to feel busy, I replied. Not to be precise. He laughed. Not politely. Genuinely. We talked for over an hour.
Not about scaling. About timing. About when not to move. About how often restraint outperforms speed, if you can tolerate being underestimated. He asked questions no one in my family had bothered to ask. What am I protecting? What am I refusing to impress? What outcome would make this plan unnecessary? At the end, he said something that surprised me. You don't need me for direction, he said. You need me for insulation. I smiled. That's exactly why I called. We discussed terms. Not discounted. Not inflated. Fair. That's how I knew he respected the plan. People who don't understand discipline try to upsell it. After we hung up, I didn't feel excited. I felt steady. That's when you know you've made a good decision. At the next family dinner, the consultant came up again. He's booked out for months, my brother said proudly. Worth every dollar. I nodded. Yes, I said. He is. They didn't notice the way I said it. Ownership has a tone. A week later, my savings crossed another threshold. Not dramatic, but meaningful. The kind of number that changes your posture when you sit down. I forwarded the consultant my updated figures. He replied with one line. Now we move carefully. My sister called that evening. I heard you're still cutting back, she said. You okay? I smiled. Better than okay, I replied. She hesitated. You sound confident. I'm buffered, I said. She didn't know what to do with that word. What they still didn't realize was that the consultant they admired so much had already shifted how he spoke to me. Not as a client chasing growth. As a peer protecting advantage. That difference would matter later. The first recommendation he made wasn't to expand. It was to wait. To let others exhaust themselves chasing momentum. To let my savings do the talking while I stayed quiet. I agreed instantly. Because patience feels reckless to people who confuse motion with progress. I thought about that as I closed my laptop that night. About how easily my plan had been dismissed. About how quickly it had earned respect from someone whose opinion actually cost money. And I realized something that made me smile. Soon, very soon, the people who doubted my restraint would start asking questions. Not because I explained myself. But because my silence would no longer make sense to them. The first crack showed up as a complaint. Not a crisis. Just enough irritation to signal something wasn't going as planned. My brother called me late one evening. Have you noticed how expensive everything is getting? He asked, half laughing. Yes, I replied. He sighed. It feels like we're running just to stay in place. I let the silence stretch. Because when people complain without asking for help, they're still protecting their pride. At the next family gathering, the tone had shifted. Less confidence. More explanation. My cousin talked about unexpected costs. My sister mentioned temporary cash flow pressure. Temporary is what people say when they don't want to examine structure. They were still moving fast. Still scaling. Still upgrading. Still spending money to maintain appearances. But now, the urgency had a new edge. Anxiety. The consultant's name came up again. He says this phase is normal, my brother said, almost defensively. He told us to push through. I nodded. Sometimes that's right, I said. Sometimes. That word unsettled him. Behind the scenes, my plan was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Savings steady. Expenses flat. Options multiplying quietly. I didn't change anything. Stability isn't maintained by reaction. The consultant emailed me that week. One sentence. They're feeling pressure. No names. No details. He didn't need to say more. That told me everything. At dinner, my sister asked a question she'd never asked before. "Can I see your spreadsheet?" she said, smiling like it was a joke. I smiled back. "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just curious." Curiosity that arrives late is usually fear looking for reassurance. I declined politely. "I keep it simple," I said. That was true. And infuriating. The first real tension arrived when a deal fell through. Not mine. Theirs. Suddenly, the consultant's advice sounded less like strategy and more like justification. "He said it's just timing," my brother insisted. "He said the fundamentals are still strong." I nodded again. I didn't argue. Because arguing with optimism feels cruel, until reality does it for you. My savings doubled again. Not because of a win. Because of consistency. I forwarded the update to the consultant. He replied with 2 words this time. "Well done." No exclamation point. That mattered. A week later, he asked to meet. Not scheduled. Not formal. Just a quiet check-in. We spoke candidly. He didn't share confidential details. He didn't have to. "I'm advising caution more than acceleration right now," he said. "With everyone?" I asked. There was a pause. "With those who can afford it," he replied. I smiled. At the next family meeting, the doubt shifted direction. Not about my plan. About theirs. "Maybe we should slow down," my sister said. My brother shook his head. "That's not what the consultant recommended," he replied quickly. The words sounded rehearsed. Like a shield. They looked at me then. Not to judge. To measure. "You still sticking to your thing?" my cousin asked. "Yes," I replied. No explanation. No apology. That night, I realized something important. My plan didn't need to outperform theirs to win. It just needed to survive. Urgency eats its own foundation. Patience builds one. The consultant emailed again. "I'd like to adjust your engagement." I read that line twice. Not concerned. Curious. On the call, he was direct. "I'm shifting how I support you," he said. Less theory. More execution. "Why?" I asked. "Because," he replied, "you're ready to move when others are not." That was the first time anyone had said it out loud. At dinner that weekend, my brother said something quietly. "I wish I'd listened more," he admitted. I looked at him. "About what?" I asked. He hesitated. "About slowing down." I nodded. "Slowing down isn't the point," I said. "Control is." He didn't respond. But something had shifted. The laughter was gone. The certainty too. In its place was something fragile. Awareness. As I drove home that night, I thought about how quickly dynamics change. How the plan they doubted had become invisible, until it wasn't. And how soon, very soon, the irony would fully reveal itself. Because the consultant they leaned on? He wasn't just advising me anymore. He was prioritizing me. The shift didn't announce itself. It never does when power changes hands. It showed up in calendars first. The consultant rescheduled my check-in to an earlier slot. Moved it from "when available" to "priority." That one detail told me everything. When we spoke, he didn't ease into the conversation. "I need to be transparent with you," he said. I waited. "I'm reallocating my time," he continued, "toward clients who can actually execute restraint." I smiled. "That's not most people," I said. No, he replied. It rarely is. He didn't say their names. He didn't have to. Consultants don't fire clients dramatically. They disengage quietly. Shorter calls. Slower replies. Less conviction. That's how you know someone has stopped believing in your trajectory. At the next family dinner, I saw it on my brother's face before he said anything. They're hard to get hold of lately, he said, trying to sound casual. Who? I asked. The consultant, he replied. Must be busy. I nodded. He is, I said. That was all. My sister frowned. I thought you said he was fully booked. He is, I repeated. They exchanged a look. For the first time, it wasn't about me. It was about access. Behind the scenes, the consultant and I were working more closely than ever. Not on expansion. On positioning. He helped me stress test my plan under conditions they'd never imagined planning for. What if nothing improves for 18 months? He asked. I'll still be fine, I replied. He nodded. That's the difference, he said. A week later, my brother called again. This time, he didn't complain. He asked. What would you do right now? He said. I chose my words carefully. I'd stop asking how to grow, I replied, and start asking what you can survive. There was silence. Then a quiet exhale. That's not what we planned for, he said. I know, I replied. The consultant sent me a revised engagement outline. Expanded scope. More direct involvement. Clearer authority. At the bottom was a note. This only works if you stay disciplined. I smiled as I signed. Discipline had never been the problem. At the next gathering, the jokes didn't return. Neither did the advice. They spoke more softly now. More cautiously. The kind of tone people use when they realize they might have misread the room months ago. My sister pulled me aside. He listens to you, she said quietly. I met her eyes. He listens to the plan, I replied. That distinction mattered. A month later, the consultant stopped mentioning my family altogether. Not out of secrecy. Out of irrelevance. Our conversations were about sequencing moves they hadn't reached yet. About protecting upside rather than chasing it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person they'd used as proof my plan was too conservative, was now validating it daily. Not publicly. Privately. Where it counts. At dinner, my cousin said something that would have felt impossible months earlier. Can you explain what you did differently? He asked. No sarcasm. No smile. Just curiosity. I didn't answer right away. Because explaining discipline to someone who's been rewarded for urgency requires care. I decided not to impress anyone, I said finally. The table went quiet. Later that night, my brother lingered by the door. You were right, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I replied. I was patient. He nodded. Like that was harder to admit. What they still didn't know, what they couldn't see yet, was how far ahead patience had put me. Not in income. In leverage. Because when pressure hits, the person who doesn't need to move controls the pace. The consultant summed it up best in our next call. You're not reacting, he said. That's why this works. I smiled. That was the plan. As I closed my laptop that night, I realized something. The reversal wasn't dramatic. It didn't humiliate anyone. It didn't need to. Because the most satisfying kind of irony doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly. And changes who people listen to. The first ask didn't sound like one. It never does when pride is still intact. My brother called on a Tuesday evening, voice measured, almost casual. Quick question, he said. You still working with that consultant? I leaned back in my chair. Yes, I replied. There was a pause. Long enough to notice. I was wondering, he continued, if you'd be open to sharing some perspective. Perspective. That's the word people use when they don't want to admit they need help. What kind? I asked. Well, he said carefully, you seem to be navigating this phase better than we are. I didn't answer right away. Because the moment someone frames your stability as guidance, the balance shifts. A few days later, my sister tried a different approach. Not a call. A coffee invite. Neutral ground. She arrived early, already stirring her drink like she needed something to do with her hands. I didn't take your plans seriously at first, she said, not looking at me. I thought you were being overly cautious. I nodded. And now? I asked. She sighed. Now I think you were protecting yourself. That was closer. The consultant warned me this moment would come. Not dramatically. Practically. When restraint starts working, he said, people will want to borrow it. Borrow. Not build. At the next family dinner, the ask became public. So, my cousin said, forcing a smile, any chance you could introduce us to your consultant? The table went quiet. Not awkward. Expectant. I met his eyes. He's not taking on new clients, I said. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. My brother frowned. But you just said. He's focused, I interrupted gently. The consultant had taught me something important. Clarity is kinder than over-explanation. Later that night, my brother cornered me near the door. We're family, he said. You could help us avoid mistakes. I nodded. I already did, I replied. He blinked. When? He asked. When I showed you my plan, I said. And you dismissed it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The hardest part wasn't saying no. It was watching them realize that access isn't automatic. Not to people. Not to strategies. Not to stability. My sister tried again a week later. This time, she was honest. We're scared, she said quietly. Things feel thinner than we expected. I believed her. Fear changes tone. I'm sorry, I said. That's not easy. She looked at me, searching. But, she asked. But I can't outsource discipline, I replied. And I can't let my plan become a safety net for urgency. She nodded slowly. That answer hurt. Which meant it was true. The consultant and I discussed it openly. You're doing the right thing, he said. They want the outcome without the posture. What happens now? I asked. He paused. Now, he said, you protect your position. Protecting position doesn't look like hoarding. It looks like boundaries. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I didn't explain spreadsheets to people who hadn't wanted to see them before. I stayed quiet. At the next gathering, something subtle shifted again. No one joked about my plan. No one criticized it either. They asked different questions now. How long did it take? What did you give up? What was the hardest part? Those questions told me everything. I answered only one. I gave up the need to be understood early, I said. The table went still. Because everyone there knew how hard that was. Later that night, my brother texted me. If things get worse, would you reconsider helping us talk to him? I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was tempted. Because I understood what was really being asked. Not for an introduction. For insulation. I didn't reply that night. Because some answers shouldn't be rushed. And because I knew something they didn't yet. The next phase wouldn't be about advice. It would be about consequences. And consequences have a way of clarifying priorities faster than any plan ever could. As I closed my laptop, I thought about the irony of it all. They doubted my restraint. Questioned my patience. Mocked my plan. And now, they wanted access to the very thing they dismissed. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt resolved. Because the real test of quiet success isn't whether people finally believe in you. It's whether you can say no when they finally do. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They arrive in missed deadlines, in tightened voices, in explanations that sound rehearsed. My brother stopped calling weekly. When he did call, it was brief. Updates without confidence. "We're adjusting timelines," he said once. "Re-evaluating priorities," he said another time. Those phrases are corporate ways of admitting something is slipping. The consultant stopped being mentioned entirely. Not because he'd disappeared. Because his absence was now obvious. At dinner, my sister said something quietly. "He's not as available anymore." I nodded. She looked at me. Not accusing. Measuring. Behind the scenes, my plan crossed another threshold. Not dramatic. Not exciting. But undeniable. I no longer needed to think about money daily. That's when you know savings have done their job. Not when they look impressive. When they go silent. The consultant and I spoke that week. He was candid. "They're chasing momentum," he said. "And momentum without buffer eats itself." I didn't ask who he meant. He didn't say. A month later, the first real consequence landed. A project my brother had been counting on was paused. Not cancelled. Paused. That's the word companies use when they want to avoid panic while preparing for it. He called me that night. Not defensive. Tired. "I should have slowed down," he said. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't about being right. It was about finally being heard. My sister fared better. She'd started cutting back quietly. Not reversing everything, just enough. "You were right about insulation," she admitted one afternoon. I smiled gently. "It's not about being right," I said. "It's about being able to breathe." She nodded. That answer stayed with her. The consultant made a move I didn't expect. He declined to renew with one of my relatives. Politely. Professionally. Citing misalignment of approach. That phrase landed hard. Because misalignment is something you can't fix with money. At the next family gathering, the mood was different again. Not tense. Sober. They weren't angry. They were adjusting. No one joked. No one asked for introductions. They spoke carefully now. Like people who understand that some doors don't reopen just because you knock differently. My brother pulled me aside. "I get it now," he said. "Not the plan, the posture." I looked at him. "Yes," I replied. He exhaled. "That took longer than I want to admit." I nodded. "It usually does." The hardest consequence wasn't financial. It was relational. They had to accept that my quiet discipline wasn't an opinion. It was a choice. One they'd opted not to make. My savings doubled again. Not because I pushed. Because I stayed. Stayed disciplined. Stayed boring. Stayed unmoved by urgency that wasn't mine. The consultant summed it up best in our next conversation. "You didn't win because you were smarter," he said. "You won because you refused to panic." I smiled. That was the plan. My brother asked one last question. "If you could go back," he said, "would you explain it differently?" I thought about it. "No," I replied. "Understanding earned late lasts longer." He nodded. That was the end of it. As the months passed, the consequences settled. They weren't ruined. They weren't rescued. They were recalibrated. And recalibration is uncomfortable when you've built your identity on speed. One evening, as I reviewed my accounts, I realized something quietly profound. The consultant hadn't changed sides. He'd followed discipline. The same way money does. The same way time does. And that's when the final irony crystallized for me. While they doubted my plan, I'd doubled my savings. While they chased validation, I'd hired their consultant. And while they scrambled for reassurance, I'd built something that didn't require any. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because consequences don't just teach lessons. They leave reminders. And the final reminder, the one that would stay with them, was still coming. The funny thing about savings is that no one notices them until they're missing. No applause. No admiration. Just the absence of panic. That's what mine bought me. The family gatherings returned to normal eventually. Not the old normal. The one filled with advice and comparisons. A new one. Quieter. More careful. More honest. No one asked about my plan anymore. They didn't need to. They could see the outcome in how I moved. My brother stopped talking about scaling. He talked about sustainability instead. My sister stopped chasing upgrades. She talked about margins. Those are not small changes. They're the kind you only make after urgency burns you once. No one mentioned the consultant again. Not by name. Not because he was taboo. Because his absence had already said enough. People don't talk about what they misread until much later. The consultant and I continued working together. Not intensely. Not dramatically. Strategically. Our conversations weren't about growth curves anymore. They were about when to do nothing. And doing nothing, I learned, is one of the most expensive skills there is. One afternoon, my brother said something that surprised me. I didn't know you were capable of this kind of patience, he admitted. I smiled. I didn't need to be, I replied. Until I did. That answer sat between us for a while. The savings number stopped being something I checked daily. That's when I knew it had worked. When money stops demanding your attention, it starts serving you. Quietly. My sister asked one final question months later. Do you think we were wrong to doubt you? She asked. I thought about it. No, I said. You were wrong to rush yourselves. She nodded. Relieved. Because blame is heavier than truth. The irony of the story still makes me smile. Not because I won. Because I never competed. They were trying to impress each other. I was trying to remove pressure. Different games. Different outcomes. If I've learned anything from this, it's this. Plans don't fail because they're small. They fail because they're loud. Because they're built to be admired instead of endured. I didn't double my savings by being smarter. I did it by being uninteresting. By saying no early. By waiting longer than felt comfortable. By refusing to perform progress for people who weren't paying the cost of failure. And hiring their consultant. That wasn't revenge. It was alignment. He didn't choose me because I had more money. He chose me because I had less noise. That's the part people miss. Experts don't gravitate toward ambition. They gravitate toward discipline. Toward clients who won't waste insight trying to impress an audience. So when I think back to that first meeting, the looks, the doubt, the polite concern, I don't feel resentment. I feel gratitude. Because being doubted gave me privacy. And privacy gave me time. And time gave me options. While they doubted my plan, I removed risk. While they debated strategy, I let math do the talking. While they chased reassurance, I built insulation. And in the end, the quietest thing in the room was also the strongest. The savings that didn't brag. The consultant who didn't advertise. The plan that didn't ask for permission. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.